Welcome to you all. Welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum at the John F. Kennedy Graduate School of Government at Harvard University. We try to make as many words as we possibly can of these things. I'm Alex Jones, Director of the Joan Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy, and as I say, I welcome you all. The Dean would have been with us tonight to welcome you himself. He's taking care of his ill wife, but I'm very glad to be here in his stead. Each year, this night is a highlight in the year of the Shorenstein Center, but this year it's sort of extra special because this is our 25th anniversary year. As some of you already know, the Shorenstein Center was founded in 1986 as a memorial to Joan Shorenstein Barone, a truly remarkable television journalist who died of lung cancer, of breast cancer, after a distinguished career that was all too short. Her father, Walter Shorenstein, endowed the center as a place for a focused and searching examination of the intersection of the press, politics, and public policy. Walter Shorenstein not only made the center possible, but remained vitally interested in what we did and was our unstinting supporter and friend. Last year, after a long and extraordinary life, he died at the age of 95. We miss him and we mourn him. He was above all else a great citizen, and the Theodore White Lecture and the David Nyan Prize are to recognize that same kind of engaged, active citizenship from a journalistic perspective. I'm proud to say that at his memorial service in San Francisco, his son, Doug Shorenstein, who is here with us tonight, said that his father's two achievements that made him proudest were his family and the Shorenstein Center. He was our goad and our great friend, our benefactor, and our visionary ally. I can say quite frankly that he really did inspire us. The Kennedy School is a place built for people who come here to learn how they can change the world. And that is why the Shorenstein Center belongs here and why it is so fitting that it should be so big a part of Walter Shorenstein's enduring legacy. I'm very glad to say that the gauntlet has been passed. With us tonight, as I said, are his son Doug Shorenstein and his daughter Carol Shorenstein Hayes, and also here is his great niece Marissa Shorenstein. I would ask that the members of the Shorenstein family stand while we pay tribute to them and the family. A bit later, you will hear our Theodore White lecturer for 2011, Andrew Sullivan. But first, I have another task to perform, which is also an honor. In 2005, we at the Shorenstein Center lost another great and much admired friend, David Nyan. Some of you did not know David, and I want to speak of him briefly as this year we bestow the 7th annual David Nyan Prize for Political Journalism. David Nyan was a man of many parts, a devoted family man, a loyal pal, and best company in the world. He was a real Boston guy, a big, handsome man with a mischievous smile and sparkly eyes and that rare power to raise everyone's spirits and make it seem like a party just by walking into the room. I can still feel the glow he imparted as a fellow at the Shorenstein Center. Tonight we honor David Nyan, the consummate reporter and political journalist, which is the role that occupied much of his life and at which he could not be bested. David was a reporter and then a columnist at the Boston Globe, and his work had both a theme and a character. The theme was almost always power, political power, and also especially the abuse of political power by the big shots at the expense of the little guys. But he also loved politicians. As a group, he respected them. He felt they were often given a raw deal and judged by a standard that was smug and sanctimonious, two things David never was. He was a self-avowed liberal and not defensive about it. Were he with us today, he would relish the coming battle for the White House. and he would have had some fun with the gaffes and goofs of the Republican primary. But he would not have been predictable. He was also always surprising his readers with his take on things, because most of all, David Nyan was his own man, and he called them as he saw them. In his memory and honor, the Nyan family and many friends and admirers of David Nyan have endowed the David Nyan Prize for Political Journalism to recognize the kind of gutsy, stylish, and relentless journalism that David Nyan embodied. David's wife, Olivia, is with us tonight, as are his children, Veronica, Kate, and Nick, and other members of the Nyan family, and I would like to ask them all to please stand. This year's David Nyan Prize for Political Journalism is awarded to Thomas Frank. Thomas Frank is from Kansas, something that has informed his life and career in ways that may have been unexpected even to him. He was born actually in Kansas City, Missouri, then grew up a bit west across the state line in Mission Hills, Kansas. As those of you who know your history will remember, Kansas before the Civil War was a hotbed of abolitionist sentiment and was known as Bleeding Kansas for the violent battles with slaveholders. Politically, 19th century Kansas might reasonably be called radically liberal by the standards of the day. It is now among the most reliably conservative states in the nation. Thomas Frank's 2004 blockbuster, What's the Matter with Kansas, was a native's son's careful, albeit polemical, analysis of why Kansas is the way it is. And as Frank saw it, the way Kansas is almost crazy. Crazy in that people there act against their own best interests, both politically and even culturally. Frank has been called the great chronicler of the American paradox. He views that paradox through the eyes of a former conservative who changed his mind. He concluded, in fact, that the views of the people of his home state, much of the great conservative movement, from his perspective, were based on what he considered a huge deception. He called it the backlash, and he described it as a cynical manipulation of cultural values. Now, what did he mean by that? As, for instance, when small farmers, in the name of small government, cast their votes for a Wall Street-designed program that will eventually push them off their land, and where the wealthiest and most privileged manage to convince the country that they speak on behalf of the people. As, for instance, when a pro-life stance trumps any other concerns, such as job safety or economic empowerment. As he put it, and I'm quoting him now, ignoring one's economic self-interest may seem a suicidal move to you and me, but viewed in a different way, it is an act of noble self-denial, a sacrifice to a holier cause. The thing about Thomas Frank, though, is that he managed to make his passionate case with humor and a wry sense of the absurd that made What's the Matter with Kansas both an iconic political rant and a huge bestseller. That book is only one of many, the most recent being Pity the Billionaire, which examines with near wonder how a capitalistic meltdown and catastrophic economic collapse for the mass has been turned into a great profit for the few. And at the same time, the Founding Fathers had been reconceived as heroes from an Ayn Rand novel, and the powerless have successfully been enlisted into a fan club for the prosperous. Perhaps he will tell us what he thinks of Occupy Wall Street. Thomas Frank is a graduate of the University of Kansas, has a PhD in history from the University of Chicago. He is an author, journalist, and columnist for Harper's Magazine, and formerly wrote extensively for the Wall Street Journal. His sense of outrage would endear him to David Nyan, as would his sense of humor. The winner of this year's David Nyan Prize for Political Journalism, Thomas Frank.
So when I really don't know what to say about being here. When I started out in journalism back in the 1990s, I never expected to be the kind of journalist that won prizes. Never, ever, ever. I was, out there. The whole idea was to declare war on cliche and war on consensus. And, I accepted that there would be no prizes in it. That was the price, right? So be it. But things have changed. I mean, we live today in a time of catastrophic intellectual dysfunction. Just 3 years ago, and with scarcely any warning from journalists, politicians, economists, the financial industry upped and threatened to fling the entire world economy over a cliff. Now, the consensus view up until that point was that an event like that was impossible, right? We were supposed to be living in this sort of wised up period in which all-seeing markets had sliced up risk and spread it around so wisely that global catastrophic events were impossible. But the consensus view was, of course, completely wrong. And the consensus view was wrong in 2003 when it accepted the president's explanation for the Iraq War. And the consensus view was wrong in 1999 and 2000 when it saw ever-rising tech prices, not as a bubble, but as evidence of mankind's growing savviness about investing. And the consensus was wrong all along when it assured us again and again and again that what made America exceptional among the industrialized nations of the world was our acceptance of extreme inequality. Now, we are sometimes told that we have entered a new age of enlightenment with Facebook and the aggregators and the celebrities tweeting each to each. But I sometimes think that the opposite is true. Outside of places like Boston and New York and Washington, D.C., people scarcely know any longer about what's going on in their state governments. Because what's left of their local newspapers doesn't bother to tell them. I mean, they can't tell them. They don't have any reporters out in Topeka or wherever it is. The most vital political movement of our time, and here I don't mean Occupy Wall Street, but the doppelganger on the other side, the Tea Party movement, is based on a vision of reality that's so perverse that it can really only exist in a kind of closed-off mental universe that brings North Korea to mind. But through it all, our Washington, D.C. consensus just chugs merrily along. Nothing can put a dent in its self-assurance. But a few things have changed. And when I first moved to Washington back in 2003, I was told that my views were outside the consensus. This is a great phrase. I love that phrase. You always hear it in Washington, D.C. That's outside the consensus. I was outside the consensus, and that therefore my views didn't need to be considered. Well, I was proud to be in that spot back then, but I am infinitely prouder to be here with you tonight. Thank you very much.
I think it's fair to say that we have two speakers tonight who are outside the consensus, but in a somewhat different way. Theodore H. White was a consummate reporter whose passion was politics. He came to Harvard on a newsboy scholarship and went on to a very distinguished career as a journalist and also a historian. Indeed, Teddy White, as he was universally known, changed both political journalism and politics when he wrote The Making of the President in 1960 about the Kennedy-Nixon campaign. For the first time, he raised the curtain on the warts and all side of presidential campaigns and changed campaign coverage forever. Ever since Teddy White, insider candor and behind-the-scenes drama have been a staple of campaign coverage. He followed that book with three more Making of the President books in 1964, 68, and 72. No one has yet surpassed those smart and groundbreaking examinations of what happens and why in the maelstrom of a political campaign. And it is fair to say, I think, that Teddy White's heirs are the journalists of today who try to pierce the veil of politics to understand what is happening and then analyze and deliver the goods to those of us who are trying to understand. Before his death in 1986, Teddy White was one of the architects of what became the Shorenstein Center. One of the first moves of Marvin Kalb, the center's founding director, was to raise the funds and establish the Theodore H. White Lecture on the Press, Politics, and Politics in his honor. This year, the White Lecture is to be delivered by Andrew Sullivan, one of the nation's most fearlessly opinionated and dazzlingly unpredictable political pundits. The very popular blog site of which he is editor, The Dish on thedailybeast.com, has as its watchwords, "To see what is in front of one's nose needs a constant struggle," a quote from George Orwell. It is a struggle that Andrew Sullivan has wholeheartedly engaged, and the result has been a powerful stream of thinking, and I don't use that word lightly. You can almost see him thinking, see the wheels turning when, for instance, he is explaining why he likes Judge Judy. No topic for him is off limits. In fact, he has a feature on The Dish called Ask Andrew Anything, in which it is in a video form, and he responds to questions such as, why do you like Judge Judy so much? Which he told me just before we came out here, he does completely extemporaneously and without knowing what the questions are going to be. For those few of you who haven't been watching daytime TV for the past 15 years, Judge Judy is Judge Judy Scheindlin, formerly Manhattan's supervising family court judge, and she is tough. On her program, Judge Judy, which is the highest-rated daily half-hour nationally syndicated program on television, she grills people and pronounces judgment. So why does Andrew like her so much? One thing is what he calls the pleasure of seeing an obvious liar being exposed on TV. A lot of the litigants who come before her lie with abandon. But, and here comes the thinking part, he said that he is dismayed that there is so little accountability in the world, and that she offers a refreshing, even inspiring authority. He called it the great relief of authority. He speaks with some of that authority on, it seems to me, any number of subjects. He has long been outspokenly gay and strongly conservative, a pairing that he sees no contradiction in. His political views include support for a flat tax, limited government, privatization of Social Security, and he opposes the welfare state programs and interventionism in any respect. He said, finds abortion personally immoral, but can legally accept the concept of abortions in the first trimester. He endorsed George W. Bush in 2000. But in 2004, he went for John Kerry, and then last time around for Barack Obama. He is strongly for gay marriage, and indeed is married to his partner. But in a view typical of him, he is critical of civil unions, which he has dubbed marriage light, and has argued that civil unions weaken the unique status of marriage, both for gays and lesbians and heterosexuals. Andrew Sullivan was born in England and took a first in modern history and modern languages at Magdalen College at Oxford, and he was elected president of the Oxford Union, which describes itself as the world's most famous debating society. He is also a graduate of the Kennedy School of Government and has a PhD in government from Harvard. He began his career at the New Republic and became its editor 5 years after joining the magazine. His broad view of what was interesting and germane prompted him to expand the magazine's focus from political coverage to cultural issues and the politics surrounding them, a theme that has been consistent from then on. He got into trouble, something that doesn't seem to bother him much, at the New Republic when he published excerpts from The Bell Curve, a controversial book that linked race and intelligence. He solved what amounted to a staff revolt by publishing lengthy rebuttals from 19 writers and contributors. But he has continued to defend his position that the book had some genuine insights. Again, he is eager for debate, but slow to back down. In 2000, he began his blog, The Daily Dish, which has become a perch that has made him one of the most influential and best-read commentators and analysts of politics and culture. The blog is now at home at thedailybeast.com. He was reared Catholic and has termed the Catholic Church the institution closest to his heart. But he is also a fierce opponent of the kind of rigid fundamentalism that he sees in the Catholic Church and elsewhere. But again, Andrew Sullivan, he says, to dismiss all religious people based on the actions of the most literalist dumb ones, I think, is bigotry. His conservatism, to his mind, is the traditional kind. He is a fiscal conservative, a limited government conservative, with a strong streak of libertarianism on social issues. But he's also a conservative who opposes government involvement with things like prostitution and the use of marijuana as civil rights issues. I think the only way to sum up Andrew Sullivan's point of view is to say that it is fearless and his own. He says what he thinks. It is my honor to present the 2011 Theodore White Lecturer, Andrew Sullivan.
Well, thank you so much for that very generous introduction. My great fantasy about Judge Judy is that she would get to do the interview with Sarah Palin, but it never happened. Can you imagine? If it doesn't make sense, it isn't true. That's something that Judge Judy is known for, and it's words to live by. I want to thank Horrid, this place which I walked into as a just 21-year-old in 1984, especially the Kennedy School of Government for its great forgiveness of my delinquency. I set a record at the time for an MPA student of taking 15 of the 16 required credits outside the Kennedy School because my interests didn't quite fit entirely within number crunching. And they changed the rules after it. So I'm glad to be responsible for greater discipline in the Kennedy School of Government. I'm here tonight to talk about conservatism, which I think it is not controversial to say is in some sort of crisis, and has been in a sort of crisis for quite a long time now. And what's staggering is when I go to campuses and talk about conservatism, the conservatism I speak of seems unrecognizable to the students of today. I studied conservatism right here. I wrote a dissertation on perhaps the greatest conservative political philosopher of all time, Michael Oakeshott, as obscure as he is profound. And read Burke and Aristotle and saturated myself in Catholic social thought as well. I do not recognize the current Republican Party as in any way a conservative force in this society. And I want to explain tonight why. For me, conservatism is fundamentally, deeply about the limits of human beings. It's about the tragedy of the human condition. It is about the paradox of progress. It is about questioning the liberal assumption that we have a solution to the problems of mankind. It understands that society is not a formula. It cannot be reduced to mathematical equations, as in economics. The social science is an oxymoron. That culture matters, that we grow up and evolve and absorb so much from our parents and our countries and our cultures, that as adults we really are across the world different people and constantly changing people. That this is a dynamic landscape full of new plants and ancient old trees. And our job as conservatives is to tend to it, to prune it, to manage it, to garden this beautiful inheritance. And along with this sense of tragedy is also the relief and release of joy. Oakeshott described it as the preference for present laughter over utopian bliss. Life is good. Life is funny. People are wonders. The West's achievement, great achievement in sustaining polities and governments which allow for diversity and pluralism and individualism and liberty, keeping government in its place, is a fantastic and unique achievement, as unique as it is always vulnerable. And the conservative will seek to defend this, not because it conforms to some ideology, not because it conforms to some ideal, but because it is his own or her own. And he or she has become familiar with it and rather likes it, and doesn't like it when it is summarily changed. This leads also to a notion that government itself can be a threat to that order. It can use its monopoly of force to rearrange things in ways that perhaps the people and the communities in the society may not want or understand or believe. It operates by force. And that's something that conservatives also understand about the origins of the state. It is vested in violence and the threat of violence. It's thoroughly occluded through constitutionalism and through time and through history, and that itself is a great achievement. But the state is a danger because a few people can get a hold of it, and just a few ideas can wreck the complicated, subtle, beautiful lives of many. It is also about doubt. Doubt about all systems of thought that claim to have resolved the human condition. For me, the great moment in my own discovery of what conservatism really is was Michael Oakeshott's famous essay on Friedrich Hayek. Oakeshott was a great critic of Hayek. Why? Because he turned capitalism into a god. He turned markets into a system that could not account for the diversity, complexity, and subtlety of the great human organism that is our society, our civitas. But also, he opposed because the state is not the only danger to a free country. So too is the accumulation and concentration of power anywhere. Whether it be bankers who can eventually and have in this country become a rentier class, not contributing what can be contributed and should be contributed by bankers, but a way to really suck value out of the society for no reason that it has expertise and power which most people cannot understand or fathom or see. So corporations too, if they are allowed to grow into monopolies, or if they are allowed to abuse their power, they too should be subject to a conservative critique. Because they too can destroy culture and society. They too, through the sheer logic of market capitalism, unearth the very things that conservatives love and support. I was privileged at Harvard to be taught by the man who wrote the classic book on that, Daniel Bell, a man whom I revere for his intellectual integrity. I want briefly to talk about two great crises that we are now confronting, which to my mind demand this conservatism, which to my mind prove the case that now more than ever, this tradition is necessary to rescue our society and indeed our world. And its absence, its striking absence from our polity, except to some extent in this president, the best conservative president since Bill Clinton, and certainly utterly absent and purged from the Republican Party, which claims absurdly, preposterously, outrageously the word conservative. Look at our debt crisis. Now, our debt crisis is caused by many factors, and I think we can all agree over many generations both parties should take some of the blame. Part of it, a conservative would say, comes from the long-term consequences of the Great Society, itself a utopian idea that is now foundering upon mathematics and generational change, generational imbalance, created by the ideology that if you just cut taxes, somehow growth will occur and deficits won't matter. Two complete ideologies foisted upon this country that have helped undermine it. It was created in many ways with good intent. Who can deny the elderly prescription drugs? It was also created critically by two wars, both of which bankrupted us and were put outrageously again off budget by an administration that trashed whatever conservative principles it ever had. But there is, I would argue, nonetheless, an obvious conservative solution to this crisis, without going over and dividing over who is to blame, without parroting some ideology or the cliches that we hear in debate after debate in this circus of a Republican primary, in which no actual proposals are made to address the actual problems that we have. But our debt is soluble. It is easy to solve. And we all know the solution. It is being done in other countries. It could be done here very easily. In fact, here we have a golden opportunity to do it quickly, easily, and restore confidence to the world markets. And if we were truly had a conservative party in this country, it would be doing so right now. It would be saying we have a constitutional system with two parties. Both of them have vested interests. Both of them represent legitimate parts of this country. One is fixated on keeping taxes low. One likes to keep its spending shoveling to its own special interest groups and indeed to the needy. Well, both have to take a hit. Personally, I would prefer spending cuts to be 3-to-1 to tax increases. But that tax increases have to happen is a mathematical fact. And the denial of this, the ability of this deranged Republican Party to even force this country into an unnecessary default because they will not accept that fact, is not conservative. It is destructive, it is radical, and it is hostile to the political order and the institutions of government. It can be done, in other words. And at the same time, I might say, there's a great conservative argument for tax reform of the 1986 kind. The tax code loaded with all sorts of deductions for all sorts of special interests. Itself the main reason we have lobbyists in Washington. Itself the main reason they remain a cancer on our body politic and keep stopping the people's will from being implemented. That could be got away with. If we went to a simple tax, I prefer a flat one, but if you could have 3 very simple rates and got rid of all the deductions, you would save so much money. You could raise revenues and reduce the rates of taxation, which might act as disincentives for entrepreneurship and growth. It's rare that we come across a solution so clearly suited to our times, that would actually restore confidence in this country, increase growth in this country, and reassure the world. And yet, the Conservative Party seeks to turn this into brinksmanship and push us over a fiscal and financial cliff. The second obvious crisis, which we are in the 10th year of, 11th year of, is the war, the religious war that has come out of the sad degeneration of many of our great religions into fundamentalist sects. And nowhere, I think, is the danger clearer and more salient than in the current conflict between Iran and Israel. We have been told, and we know now, that the Israeli government has said it will not even inform the United States if it launches a first strike upon Iran's nuclear facilities. Such a strike would, in my opinion, unleash the Third World War. A first strike by the Jewish state upon an Islamic nation is a declaration of religious war at a global level. For all the success we have had, primarily under this president, in diffusing this terrible conflict, a religious conflict that is by far the most dangerous form of warfare, because the stakes are divine and God demands total sacrifice, is terrifying, the prospect of this initiating. And yet we sit here as if nothing is going on, when the ex-chief of the Mossad is going public in Israel and saying the people running this country are crazy and capable of launching a preemptive war at any moment, we know we are in grave danger, especially since the United States would be directly implicated as Israel's chief ally in the Middle East. Now, you will find no one in this room more hostile to the despicable regime in Tehran. No one. As a blogger, I followed hourly, minute by minute, for a month, that amazing, astonishing revolution of hope, of youth, of pluralism, of freedom, and of faith. I stand with them. I stand with the people of Iran and not with its vicious, vile, murderous, mischievous regime. But I don't believe that it is possible at any point in the future to stop a country with the sophistication and ability of Iran developing a nuclear bomb capacity. I do believe they are doing so, even though I keep reminding myself of the fantastic error I made in 2003 in accepting the bullshit that was served up as intelligence of Iraq's WMDs. I also don't believe that this regime in Iran wants to commit suicide. And I do not understand why mutually assured destruction, which kept the peace in this world for 50 years between the US and the Soviet Union, is inapplicable somehow to the Middle East. Iran does not have a record, even under this vile regime, of actually attacking other countries except through proxies. Israel has attacked many more foreign countries than Iran on a regular basis. My view is that what we need is George Kennan. What we need is a true conservative approach to this, which wants to contain Iran, not the crazy George W. Bush-style preemptive war that created such chaos and murder. I believe we need containment, not preemptive war, because I think preemptive war will also destroy the state of Israel, completely delegitimize its existence, and possibly lead to the extinction of many of the Jewish people who live in Israel. And I stand before you also a very proud and fervent Zionist. These great crises, and I think they're real, deserve a conservative response. A conservative response that believes in stability, that believes in reforming institutions in line with their current existence, fixing the problems that are obvious and not fixing things that don't need to be fixed. I want to just correct Alex, I do not believe in the privatization of Social Security. I've learned my lesson. I did once, and I've seen the experiments both in Britain and in Chile and other places of this, and frankly, looking at the stock market over the last 10 years, I don't think I want to commit the savings and future of so many people to the extraordinary gyrations of that market. Containment and stability in the Middle East to allow and to permit this astonishing and conservative bubbling up from the young and the idealistic of democracy in the Middle East, which is a fantastic development and is an organic development. The contrast between conservatism and liberalism, as I understand it, would be exactly the contrast between what happened in Tunisia and what we tried to impose in Iraq. Democracy, a conservative understands, has to come from the culture, cannot be imposed on it. And when some Bush officials said we create reality, they were telling us that they had left conservatism far, far behind. So this is conservatism's moment. It is the time we need desperately for a sober conservative force in the world. We do have one to some extent in our president, a man whose temperament and whose judgment are empirical, and who is, in my view, a natural Burkean conservative, which is why he is despised so much by the radical party that opposes him. But one final thing. Conservatism has also been associated in recent years with capitalism. And capitalism, market capitalism, proper market capitalism, which means regulated market capitalism, according to Adam Smith, is a great and wonderful thing. It is the most and has been the greatest engine for human wealth and material well-being that we've ever seen. And the last 10 years has been a miracle around the developing world in which people's lives have been immeasurably improved through the engine of capitalism. It's only this country forced now to compete with billions of new competitors that is suffering. And we regard it as a crisis that we are going through a recession, which means simply that our wealth collectively is the same now as it was in 2001. I do not want in any way to minimize the misery and difficulty of many people in this country who are struggling to find jobs and make ends meet. I do not. But I do want to say that their standard of living is something that their predecessors in this country for hundreds of years would have thought simply miraculous. That the notion that a society cannot really exist and be stable and that it is unless it is constantly gaining money and wealth and material things is an illusion, a false god. Conservatism has always said that there are no solutions to the fundamental human problem except, ultimately, religion. And that is where religion comes in, as a solace not a means of power, not something that these fundamentalists wield to control others, but something that truly spiritual people trust in silence to resolve the deepest problems. And I'll end with Oakeshott's last published piece. He was going to write a piece, another essay, but never got around to it, which would have been really interesting. It was going to be on religion. But this was about politics and about our society now. What he called the civitas cupiditatis, the society of want, material want. And he decided to tell the story through the great and ancient story told in many different cultures, reflecting a deep human truth before culture, the Tower of Babel. And I want to read it to simply say that conservatism must never be about greed. Greed is a sin. It must be, and society must provide material well-being. But that is not its goal. That is not our end. That is not what we are here to do. As a Christian, I believe that the amount of riches we build up will actually prevent us from living good and happy and love-filled lives. Oakeshott. In this version of the tale, the curtain rises upon Babel, a city full of the bustle of getting and spending. A vast variety of enterprises is afoot. There's an endless proliferation of wants and satisfactions. The inhabitants are noted for their fickleness. The general atmosphere is one of moderate vulgarity. Art has degenerated into entertainment, and the entertainments are apt to be crude. The Babelians have no particular spectacular vices and no heroic virtues. They are easily seduced by novelty. If they had Madame de Sévigné's gift of introspection, they too would exclaim, "Dear God, how I love fashion." They are self-absorbed and self-indulgent. It is indeed a city of freedom, the home of every imaginable lib. Yet a stranger, come among them, might have recognized them also to be a difficult people. There is an undercurrent of discontent, an aimlessness, and an absence of self-discipline. The stoic and martial virtues are notably absent from their character. They are a wayward rather than a listless people, and they are resentful of government, not as a wild and passionate people may be, but in the manner of spoilt children. Indeed, such order as there is among them has for so long been maintained by bribes that this is the only control they now kind of tolerate. In short, Babel is, let me interject, America is, a civitas cupiditatis, and its inhabitants, although not overwhelmingly affluent, are a people devoted to affluence. From one point of view, this tale of Babel is that of the nemesis of greed. I fear the nemesis is at hand. Thank you.
We are going to have a question period now. Andrew, if you would come back to the lectern. These are the ground rules. If you would line up at the microphone here, 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 or here. If you would say who you are. If you would ask a question briefly. and if you would make sure that what you ask ends with a question mark, please. So if I may ask those of you who are interested in asking a question, please step forward to the microphone. I have a question for you before we start, Andrew. Your portrait of America, in an odd way, is an interesting juxtaposition with Thomas Frank's vision of America. If you were calculating what you agree with and what you don't agree with what you know and have heard of Thomas Frank, how would you describe that?
You know, I didn't know that you're an ex-con, as it were. You know what I mean. I think almost all the most interesting liberals, like Gary Wills, are formerly conservative. And I don't want to. I'm not. I didn't just read your book, so I'm having to address some of the broader ideas within it. I think it's largely right, except I think I would disagree about the solution, and I think I would disagree about the way that government might redistribute wealth to overcome this problem. What I found particularly good about your book was its refusal to condescend to those who believe passionately as a religious question in the sanctity of human life. It is an immensely difficult question, and I think, frankly, the Supreme Court bears a huge amount of responsibility for the damage that this issue has done to this country by denying the people of this country the democratic ability to make a decision for themselves about what is a terribly difficult and complex moral issue. And which comes to the point of this, which is that they are tragically, I think, misunderstanding or have been misled about religion. And I do think that just as we have a political crisis, we have a religious crisis. Essentially what's happened, it seems to me, goodness knows, how am I going to summarize that quickly? But basically, fundamentalism has replaced faith. I'm not sure these people even believe or even know what it is to believe. I sure don't. I think anyone really in front of the Godhead trying to understand, as I do, the mysteries of my faith is not in any position to tell anybody else how to live his or her life. And that move, the move from truth to power, is the move that Jesus resisted. It's the move that Jesus resisted to his death. If God is God, I cannot know him, let alone know him well enough to tell you how to live your life. That core concept of religious freedom is something that I'm afraid has been forgotten, has been bound up in culture, in class, and is being used cynically by some, especially in the Republican Party, for political advantage. I say this as a gay man who has been among the first objects of attack, according to this politics. So I think that, frankly, I also think, frankly, that liberal condescension towards the heartland has a huge part of this too. This is a two-way street of misunderstanding. And what I really hoped for Obama was his ability to try and communicate. And I believe, and I'm sorry if there are a lot of disillusioned Obamaites here, I believe this president has tried as hard as anybody humanly could to overcome that divide and has met with the most repulsive, radical, and obstructionist opposition that we've seen in a very long time. And I supported Obama not because he was a liberal, but because he was a conservative. If you remember my piece, Goodbye to All that he was a post-conflict, pragmatic believer in wanting to get a deal with the Republicans. That which the Democratic base hates him for, I love him for. Sorry.
That's okay.
So it means, just to finish, it is vital he be re-elected. Vital. And anybody who has any lack of enthusiasm about that needs to wake up.
Let's start here and go around.
Thank you very much. My name is Alex Remington. I'm an MPP1. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. When you mentioned earlier the failure, among others, of the media and the journalistic establishment in the run-up to the 2008 financial crisis, of course, the 2003 Iraq War, and on and on and on, I wanted to ask what you, as a journalist, among other things, would like to see, would like to suggest for the American journalism industry, the American journalism institution. How does it get better? How does it do its job?
Get off cable news, number one. No serious journalist should go on that circus. Secondly, the cult of the journalist as celebrity, with all the lucrative speaking gigs that it brings. I mean, the classic journalistic trajectory in Washington is get a low-level whatever reporting job. You can be 21 and at Politico at, sub minimum wage internet treadmill, and your job is to get on MSNBC for 10 minutes, and then your job is to get famous, and then your job is to give speeches and make the real money. That's not what journalists should be doing, obviously. Journalism in Washington is corrupted by clubbiness, by this consensus that you talked about, which unfortunately is not even that explicitly noted. It is much more dangerous because it is completely subterranean. The notion that journalists have reputation, that we should be up on a pedestal, maybe it's because I'm British. I think we're the lowest of the low. I think our job is to say things that no one else will say, and to find out things that make people very uncomfortable, the powerful and the powerless. I think our job is not to worry about the impact of what we find out and say, but to say what we think and to report what we see. I remember my own notorious now and widely derided obsession with Sarah Palin in the last election. And my obvious question about her absolutely ridiculous story about her alleged fifth child. I wasn't allowed to ask that question in the mainstream media. I talked to lots of other reporters who were all talking about it, who wanted to know the answer. I said to one, "Do you think this could be true? It's so crazy." He said, "I think it could be true. I wonder how it gets into the mainstream media." I was like, "You are the bloody mainstream media." And he said, "Well, don't do it. It'll hurt your reputation." Who cares about my reputation? I don't. I should be dead by now. I mean, at 30 years old, I was given 6 years to live. I don't regard that as a missive to tell lies. Now, I haven't told lies about this, but I have asked questions and demanded answers, and no answers were given. And part of the problem and part of what we're seeing is that a whole class of politicians are not being open to the press in ways they really should be. Sarah Palin ran for vice president as unknown without a single press conference. Staggering. You know why? Because each media unit wanted their own exclusive gig, their own little interview they could sit down and peddle as the exclusive get. So none of them got together and said, "You get up there and you answer every bloody question we want until we're done. This is a democracy. You are not a celebrity, you're a servant of the people." And we've forgotten that, and we've become rich and smug and clubby, and kind of makes me sick to tell you the truth. But and I must say that's one of the reasons I love blogging. I love it. I can do what I want. Every day I can say whatever I want. Now, if I'm wrong, I'm committed to correcting. And not just in spinach on the second page of the New York Times, I mean, no one sees it, but right up there, right up front, right where I wrote the original, please. That's kind of as a process over 10 years, that's pretty great. I have 1.4 million fact checkers. Within seconds, if I get the spelling wrong of some Latin word, I will get 3 emails within instant. That relationship, I think, and that's why I believe that online journalism, blogging really is, in some ways, it contains within it, doesn't necessarily have to happen, but contains within it a revival of citizen journalism in a way that can bring truth back to the discourse.
Hi, my name is Zachary Rosenfeld. I'm MPP 1 here at the school, and a fan of the blog. Hope to one day win the View from Your Window contest. I just wanted to ask you.
You can tell you're at Harvard.
So
I'm staggered by that contest, by the way. The nerdiness of it is staggering.
I was hoping to ask if you could expound on your idea of utopianism in ideology. And I really wanted to press you on the statement you said, I'm an avid Zionist. To me, I think of Zionism as being a sort of utopian idea, a way of remaking the world into something better for the Jewish people. And I was wondering, what makes that different than something that you would describe as utopian?
That's a brilliant question. I say that because right now, well, let me explain where I'm at. I was brought up with a deep sense of the Holocaust as an unparalleled and unique mark of human evil. And it affected me deeply. I visited Israel as a young man, and it also affected me deeply. And I think the fact of the matter is it now exists. But I wrote a post, a throwaway line in the blog lately, which you might have caught on to, where I compared the euro with the state of Israel. You may think that's a leap, but let me explain why. Both were born out of the Second World War, the absolute horror of the Second World War, really. One was a way to atone for the Shoah, and to give the Jewish people finally a safe refuge. And I think that was an incredibly noble, but yes, utopian vision. And I don't think a Burkean conservative would ever have agreed to it. And I happen to think at the time, I don't know, but I think I probably would have said no. Which I know will make me lots of friends. The euro too. Europe's suicide in the first part of the 20th century, grotesque suicide, and the desire to expunge that from history forever by creating a currency that would unite this entire continent. Well, first of all, an economic community. It grew, but as it grew, I think its utopianism accelerated. And the euro, I think, was the step too far. I find the idea of a Europe where you can travel without boundaries, where trade is freely traded, where you can go wherever you want and work in any country you want. I love the fact that like hundreds of thousands of Poles rebuilt parts of Britain. I just love it. It's a fantastic Americanization churn in Europe, which I find, considering its history, inspiring. But the euro is insane. It always was insane. And this is an example where conservatism was right. Thatcher that was a joke, was correct. You can't possibly have a currency union without some kind of political or monetary union. You just can't. And at some point, these different countries and cultures are going to reveal themselves, and it's all going to go down the tube. Similarly, I'm always reminded of the Onion's headline in its world's worst century collection of Jews seek homeland. No, war-weary Jews seek homeland between Syria, Egypt, Iran, of all the places. But I still think Israel could have survived. I think that the occupation of the West Bank and the disgusting treatment of the Palestinians in the West Bank and the brutal attack upon Palestinians in Gaza and the increasingly deranged fundamentalist nature of its government is potentially fatal. I'm afraid it may have gone past the point of no return. And here's the great Tower of Babel moment. You brought 6 to 7 million Jews all together in a place where they're now vulnerable to mass extinction. That's the paradox of utopianism.
We're going to go into Ask Andrew Anything mode, which means a limited.
Sure, I'm sorry.
Okay, because we've got several people. I want to let them all
I'm sorry,
have
but
a
that
chance.
topic is so interesting.
I got you. I understand, but I want to hear you. But
Okay, I know. I'm sorry. I will keep my answers short.
All right.
I apologize. 2 minutes.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Rohit Malhotra. I'm MPP 1. It's really awesome to see you. I actually wrote my final thesis in college on Oakeshott, and so you were in my works cited, so that's pretty
Fantastic.
cool.
Congratulations on your discernment.
Yeah, it was an okay paper.
He's a tough nut to crack.
Yeah, no, that was hard. So I wanted to know my background is in social media and digital mobilization, and what I'm really interested in is what is the online community missing that isn't driving innovative and new journalism, and we're still kind of stuck. How do we find that fine balance between what happened in Tunisia and what happened in Egypt online, and someone just updating their status about what they ate for lunch? Like, where is the fine balance between that to find good journalism out of that?
Do good journalism is the only answer to that, and people will come. I mean, if you really, everybody has a blog now. It's called Facebook, and it's great, and everybody's communicating. But I don't want to know when my best friend just had a bowel movement. I'm not that interested in the fact he saw something at Target 3 minutes ago. This is not world-shattering events. But on the other hand, there's some fun. I have no problem. The web is not zero-sum. The great thing about it is non-zero sum. Nothing is at the expense of anything else, because it's an infinite expanse. So my view is simply use this new media as we are beginning to figure out. And I like to think of the dish as this sort of ice cutter, an experimental, because I have nobody to answer for, because I have total editorial control, to try stuff out. Like the Iran coverage, which I think took us to between Nico and me and a few others, we advanced a whole new form of journalism, live blogging, live events, which is now part of the New York Times, part of the Lead, the Caucus. Do it, and they will come.
Yes, sir. Up here. Yes.
Hi, my name is Katie. I'm a junior at the college. In one of your recent Ask Andrew videos, and also in response to the first question, you mentioned that in the 90s you were a writer with nothing to lose, but now it seems like you're a writer with everything to lose. So how have you managed to maintain that same willingness to challenge everything and change your mind and sort of stay?
I don't have anything to lose anymore.
I mean, in terms of like reputation, and, readership. Yeah.
I don't care about my reputation. I know that sounds pompous in a way, and I do think that two things affected me in that, and one was the HIV diagnosis young, when it was still untreatable, and surrounded by people I loved who I saw dying. My best friend died in front of me. We were diagnosed in the same month, and he died 2 years later, and I watched it. I don't think he'd want me to be bullshitting the rest of my life. That's why I wrote Virtually Normal. I inscribed the date of the foreword, the date I found out I had HIV. There is something wonderful about living posthumously, because it is actually living now. It is. Look, when I read the Gospels, I see in Jesus a man utterly without a care for the future, utterly without a care for his reputation. A man who was silent when accused of something he was not guilty of. Now, I'm not equating myself. I'm saying that that's my that's my goal, and I fail. Of course, I'm proud. I feel offended. I'm upset. The whole, there's been several debates which I felt terribly wounded by. And in the 90s, in the gay wars, it was brutal. And I felt attacked by the people I loved. The other thing is just being out as a gay man. When you're 21, 22, and you want to be a journalist, and you want to, you have a choice, You knew at that time it could define you forever and marginalize you. Or did you want to live your life? And I think I wanted to live my life. It was really about that. Screw it. I couldn't lie. So that's the answer. So, and the truth is, none of you in this room have anything to lose by telling the truth, except your own humiliation and recognition of one's own fallibility. Sir.
Yes, here and here. Those will be the last two.
Hi, I'm Ari. I'm doing a PhD in literature and a huge fan of the dish.
Thank
it's an
you.
honor to see you here. Thank you. My question is about something, I think, a problem you've observed with Obama and the Republican field, and something that supporters of Israel think about Israel and the Arab world. And that is, how do you be reasonable with unreasonable people? And what is the tactic? What are the modes of argument, the modes of interaction that can cause positive outcomes in relationships that often seem like they're severely asymmetrical?
This is another brilliant question. And I was thinking about this recently. Because again, one comes back to the Gospels, I think. There is a tone of voice that I have to admit I have failed many times to adopt, because I'm a bit of an Irishman, and occasionally I get testosterone shots. But I hope that over the years I've moderated a little bit in terms of accepting other people's point of view. And my favorite, diffusing those moments, 3 words come to mind. Oh, come off it. Oh, come on. In a way that you allow the person not to lose faith, but to somehow also acknowledge they're wrong in some respect. Creating an atmosphere in which that is possible, which is why, and I think Obama has it, but I think so few others do at this point. But I don't think, and in the gay rights movement, when I started talking about marriage rights, I'll call you out, EJ. You reviewed Virtually Normal, and you said, "I love this book, but except for this marriage stuff, I love EJ, but EJ's a reasonable person. When I had to go on Christian talk radio, when I had to go up against Pat Buchanan, when I had to go up against the religious right, the temptation was to be so angry and upset as to just scream. But I realized that no, reason will win in the end. If I didn't believe that, I would not believe in liberal democracy. Reason will win in the end, and calm reason constantly. The arguments. We've won. We haven't won everywhere, but we've won the basic principle. We have got now on immovable marriage rights in at least a hefty chunk of this country, and we did so because our arguments were better. So my experience is that it works, and also in terms of more massive social protests, nonviolence always, against unreasonable people. Passivity, it disarms them. It bewilders them.
Final question.
Thank you very much. My name is Benjamin Esparza, and I'm a dish head. And I guess I have the pleasure of the last question. So, I guess to follow up on that point, and more or less what you were talking about, my question is, what do you think the end game is? And in going back to your presentation and the things you've talked about tonight, it seems like there's a general sense of despair and some pessimism about where we are. You made reference to the Tower of Babel, and we all know how that ends. So I'm wondering, what do you think happens from now on? I hate to say it, like, what's the future, because it's such a cliche question, but where do you see the conservative movement going? Where do you see our politics going when, reason will win, but these people don't listen to reason and scorn people like you who are reasonable?
Yeah, I'm completely anathema. You have a two-term governor of Utah, re-elected with 84% of the vote, who has foreign policy experience with our most important rival power, really interesting ideas on tax reform, who is polling at 1%, and a motivational speaker who has a pattern of serially harassing women is the front runner, or was the front runner until, I don't know, we better check your watch. Or we have this preposterous man, Newt Gingrich. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think the only way they will learn is by being defeated soundly. I happen to think that I hope that would happen sooner, but unfortunately there was some sort of cultural panic, and we may have to wait some time. But look, the debt is inevitable. Either we will go under, or we will take measures to stop it. The question is whether we will be proud of ourselves for waiting, and that's also what's happening in Europe. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And Merkel has to do something. So in other words, in all politics, there are simply practical things to be done. And we hope they are done. It's muddling through. There's no end point. I'm an Oakshotian. There's just now.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Tomorrow morning on the top of the Taubman building at 9 o'clock, we will have a panel including both Thomas Frank and Andrew Sullivan and some other distinguished commentators and analysts who will discuss the things that were said tonight. We encourage you to come. We'll be serving coffee and a continental breakfast at 8:30. We will start at 9. We hope to see you there. Thank you very much. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Andrew. This was extraordinary. Thank you.